Knowing humans, this is not something that people choose. So any attempt to limit our natural tendency to dominate things or have things needs a large body like a government. It needs to be structural. You can't ask people to give up things, they're no good at it. I mean, that's just knowledge. And also it shouldn't be a matter of individual morality. Nobody's that good.
One of the obvious outcomes of what I've just been describing, that we have a more Spartan and more sparse culture, and that actually we have to be more frugal with the resources that we have. I suppose one of the responses to that is that I tend to think of things in terms of these things being a creative constraint, and actually that having to do with less, having to live with less, trying to think about that creatively. And I think there are a lot of brilliant people out there doing exactly that at the moment. So it's about listening to them and learning from them.
Less arguments. Isn't that interesting that less was easier to do? I worry in society at the moment that we spend a lot of time in conflict with each other. That's not to say we should disagree, and we should be able to speak robustly about the things we care about, but how quickly discussion escalates into something that isn't helpful. It happens quite quickly.
Less sniping at each other across the channel, how about that? Less war of words, less sort of petty disputes that don't actually help the two countries get on. So less of that would be also welcome.
I love the idea of limits, of less. You know, Mozart played on a 5-octave piano, Jimi Hendrix on a 6-string guitar, Serena Williams within the boundaries of the tram lines of a tennis court. We need limits, because limits unleash creativity. If anyone says, I don't want to be limited, I don't want less, I don't want to be hemmed in by, carbon emission targets and not being able to fly everywhere when I want, how I want, well, actually, there's all sorts of kinds of freedom that we can express within limits by having less. In the 18th century, there was freedom in the Western world to own another person, slavery, to make your meal for you, to clean your house for you. But we've mostly got rid of that kind of freedom of choice. We've limited freedom into other areas. Now we've got to limit it again. We've got to limit it from high carbon impact actions and decisions and choices. And so we are left with choices to love and to dream and to create communities and to believe and debate and to cook and whatever it happens to be. There are all sorts of ways of having more while having less stuff. That's what I want less of.
What we definitely need less of is a neoliberal classical capitalistic system that continues to very much function within an extractive economy, an economy that consumes, overconsumes, and places a value on overconsumption. And so that means coming back to what is most essential. We need more of coming back to what is most essential. We need less of material goods. And some of those dependencies, in fact, some would say, and there's a new book by Robert Constanza, an ecological economist, who talks about the addiction to growth, that being very much an understanding of actually that addiction to growth is not bringing us happiness. That addiction to growth is not only not bringing us as people happiness, but is decimating most of the species on this planet and is making us actually live through a series of different tipping points that are very much planetary tipping points, but also will increasingly become social tipping points.
Can I say fewer assumptions? We need to learn more about each other, how we complement each other, what France can learn from the UK and what the UK can learn from France. And I think there is so much that these two countries can do together. So yeah, fewer assumptions and more willingness to get to know each other.
Less acrimonious debates, less personal debate, insulating the relationship a little bit as far as possible from the personal difficulties that one may have across the channel with one prime minister or one president in particular. But it's kind of unavoidable that these relations are marked by the state of the personal relationship. I'm actually quite confident that Prime Minister Sunak and President Macron could develop a very good working relationship. At least it will be easier in this particular configuration than it has been in previous configurations.
Actually, I think we need, less talking and more doing. We need less bureaucracy about how we do things. And I would say that we need less structures that resist change. We need more structures that will transform lives, more flexible
ways of working, more adaptive behavior across the board.
Go for it. We're all trying to do with less, but the challenge is that less doesn't necessarily mean worse, and I think that's conceptual key we need to solve, because if we think that less is worse, then we'll never cope with the situation, so we should think that less is much better.
Parler du moins, c'est de parler en quelque sorte d'une certaine idée de la beauté pour moi. De ne garder que ce qui est indispensable, comme disait Miss Van der Rohe, less is more, et de voir comment en élaguant, comment en enlevant, on peut peut-être, avec un peu de chance, arriver à l'essence. C'est ça pour moi le moins.
Je voudrais qu'il y ait un monde avec moins de violence. Voilà, moins de violence collective, les guerres civiles, moins de violence physique, verbale, sexuelle, et aussi moins de violence symbolique, ce qui renvoie aussi à la question de la justice sociale.
Less violence or less stereotypes. I think that stereotypes is really or cliché. It's really bad things, but it's part of a big system, of economic system. If we don't have stereotypes, for example, we are not going to buy different clothes for men or women, for example. We are not going to buy different perfumes or different shampoo. So stereotypes is used by the economic system. In school or in if you choose your job, sometimes when a boy wants to have a feminine job, it's impossible, and it's at the contrary for women it's the same. So I think that we have less stereotypes, less cliché, less violence. I think more happiness, not only for men like Yvan said before, but for everybody, and especially I think that women, children, and refugees or immigrants are more confronting to violence in general.
We need to interfere less with nature. We need to have things that work less against the natural ecosystem and reduce this negative push that we have on the natural environment.